take me through what you're reporting today with your colleagues.
Sure. So we've been able to obtain a subpoena issued by the grand jury in D.C., and it does reveal some important avenues that they're looking into. One is so-called VIPs at the January 6th rally. They're requesting information from witnesses about these Trump VIPs. The second is anyone in the executive or legislative branch who had anything to do with plans to disrupt or interfere with the January 6th vote of Congress, the certification of Joe Biden's election before Congress. And then the third is the scheme to use pro-Trump electors or so-called fake electors in states that were won by Joe Biden to actually vote for Donald Trump instead. And so those are huge topics. Those are sprawling topics. And so this investigation could potentially go anywhere. We don't know exactly where it's going or what the Justice Department will find, but we do know now from the subpoena exactly some very specific avenues for what the Justice Department is looking into as they work their way up from rioters to potentially other people.
Luke Brabender, I think one of your earliest appearances on this program was several after you wrote a piece really sort of investigating and reporting out connections between sitting Republican members of Congress and some of the very same extremist groups who are under scrutiny both by the 1-6 committee and very much so by DOJ. I wonder how this subpoena potentially pulls some of them in based on what you just mentioned about potential legislative targets.
Again, we don't know what we don't know, right? But it does specifically say legislative branch. So that means that in the federal system, we're talking about Congress, right? So potentially, we know there were connections between some of the people who were planning rallies and some members of Congress. Could that be something they ask about? We know that some members of Congress did have interactions or meetings with different extremist groups over time. Could that be something that they ask about? We honestly don't know the answers to those questions, but we do know from this subpoena that the legislative branch is something that the Justice Department is now interested in as they're asking witnesses through this grand jury.
Jackie, one of the sort of dramatic undercurrents around the 1-6 committee is will they or won't they subpoena their own colleagues? And I wonder if the pressure may now go the other way, right? We've talked for so long about Chairman Thompson and Vice Chair Cheney's aggressive posture on criminality. Their filing makes clear that the committee feels that they have gathered enough evidence to say that crimes were committed. You now have a federal judge in the Eastman case saying that likely felonies were committed by Donald Trump and John Eastman specifically. Now you have DOJ saying that its criminal investigation will now, if not target, scrutinize the legislative branch. How might that influence a decision as to whether or not to subpoena members?
Yeah, Nicole, I think that could potentially influence the committee, although they have done a good job at this point in time of sort of abiding by the firewall between the committee and the DOJ. We just reported earlier as one example of this firewall that the Justice Department actually stonewalled committee staffers who sought to learn more information about prosecutors' views on the impending referrals from Chief of Staff Mark Meadows and then the referrals that are likely to pass through the House tonight to Dan Scavino and Peter Navarro, and that's according to people who are familiar with the matter. Obviously, the department has not yet acted on the December vote, but when it comes to the issue of actually subpoenaing their own colleagues, this is something where a DOJ investigation could help alleviate some of that pressure that members have already been weighing behind closed doors. We've been told that lawmakers have been acutely aware of not trying to further inflame the situation. And I think that a red line that has sort of been drawn, and as we've seen so far, at least, because the committee has voluntarily requested that people like House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, Jim Jordan, and Scott Perry appear before the committee, and they have not yet cooperated, and we haven't seen subpoenas, that the committee is treading pretty lightly with these kinds of cases. But I do think at the end of the day, if these contempt referrals are continued to be left hanging and ultimately render Congress's subpoena power toothless, then we could see the committee try to take different moves in order to apply more pressure for cooperation as they scramble to close up this investigative chapter and move towards the public hearings.
Neil, I want to read a little bit more from Luke's reporting, and then I have a question about where this may lead. The Times is reporting this. It's not clear if any Trump-era executive or legislative branch members have received subpoenas. There's no public indication that anyone has been targeted for prosecution. But in looking for more information about what was happening at both the White House and on Capitol Hill as Trump sought to stay in power, the House Select Committee has already expressed interest in a range of White House and campaign advisors. Among them is Mark Meadows, the White House chief of staff under Trump, Katrina Pearson, a longtime Trump political advisor who was in direct contact with Trump about the details of the rallies on January 5th and January 6th, including who would be speaking and what music would be played. We forget sometimes that Trump, for as bad as he was at the details of protecting democracy and fighting a pandemic, was obsessed with the production details of political events from the playlist. And I remembered this when I read this great reporting from Luke and his colleagues. This is specifically about the 1-6 committee's work. But if those two bodies, Congress and the White House, and these two activities, planning of the rallies, come under scrutiny by DOJ, that seems like the clearest indication yet that if they do what Merrick Garland says they're going to do and they follow the facts where they lead, those lead straight to Donald Trump.
You're exactly right, Nicole. So I think this story today in the New York Times is really welcome news by the Garland Justice Department. And, you know, what a subpoena is it's a request by prosecutors for documents. It's not going to be like a target letter saying you committed a crime. They're starting to investigate. And those of us have been, you know, including yourself and I, have been concerned that so far the investigative signs haven't really radiated beyond basically who invaded the Capitol. But this story by Luke says, no, the subpoenas are broader. They include planning for January 6th, who spoke there, who organized the January 6th stuff. And that's a lot. I mean, at this point, the subpoena might as well include the category of anyone who ironically considered downloading Truth Social. It's a lot of people. You know, potentially a lot of people are swept up in this, like a greater number than, you know, Trump probably gave COVID to. It's a broad amount and one that may ultimately wind up being at Trump's footstep for the reasons you're suggesting. I mean, the idea that Donald Trump wasn't involved in the production and theatrics of January 6th has always been a bit difficult to swallow. But I think that's what the investigators are building their case for. It's still obvious early on. And I'd say one other thing to Merrick Garland's credit. This wasn't like announced in some sort of press release or anything. My guess is the way in which Luke got this information is from one of the targets of a subpoena, not from some leak or something like that, or some even official pronouncement. That's the Justice Department doing its job right, quietly in the shadows. We've all been hoping that the investigation has been proceeding in the shadows, even if we're not hearing about it. This is a good indication that it is.